November 14th, 1999, 6 people in Traverse City, Michigan woke up to the same nightmare. Their bedroom windows, locked the night before, were open, just a few inches. Rain soaking the sills, muddy streaks on the frames like something had gripped them from outside. All 6 lived alone. Robert Fenton was one of them. He checked his locks every night, an obsessive habit from childhood. But that morning, his window was open, and he had no explanation. He called the police. They dismissed it as wind damage. They were wrong, because over the next 2 weeks, police discovered something that made their blood run cold. This had happened before, in 1989, in 1973, in 1957. Every 16 years, the same pattern. Same town, same windows, same muddy prints. And every time, one person disappeared. On November 27th, 1999, Melanie Cross didn't show up for her shift at the hospital. When police entered her home, the front door was locked from the inside. Her bedroom window was open, exactly 3 inches. Melanie was gone. What was opening those windows? And why did it only come for people who slept alone? Stick with me, and if this pulls you in, hit that like button. This story gets darker. Robert Fenton wasn't a paranoid man. He was an accountant, 42 years old, divorced 3 years prior, and living in a modest 2-bedroom home on the outskirts of Traverse City, Michigan. His life was routine. He woke at 6, made coffee, drove to the office, came home, ate dinner, watched the news, and went to bed. He didn't believe in ghosts or superstitions. He believed in spreadsheets and logic. But he also believed in patterns, and the window bothered him because it broke the pattern. The house was built in 1974, a simple ranch-style structure with aluminum siding and a single-car garage. Robert had moved in after the divorce, needing space away from memories and arguments. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly retirees and young families, the kind of place where people waved from their driveways and didn't lock their doors. Robert always locked his. That habit came from his mother, who'd raised him in Detroit during the 1960s and 70s. She drilled it into him. Check the locks, close the windows, don't let anyone know you're alone. Even now, decades later, he performed the same ritual every night. He'd walk through the house, testing each window latch, checking the deadbolts on both doors, setting the chain lock on the front entrance. He did it the night of November 13th, just like always. He specifically remembered the bedroom window because it stuck. The latch was stiff, required a firm push to click into place. He'd even muttered under his breath about needing to oil it. Then he'd gone to bed and fallen asleep to the sound of distant thunder. The storm arrived around 3 a.m. Robert was a light sleeper, and the noise woke him. Rain drumming on the roof, wind howling through the trees. He lay there for a few minutes, listening, before rolling over and trying to fall back asleep. He succeeded. When he woke again at dawn, the storm had weakened to a steady drizzle. That's when he felt the cold. His bedroom was freezing. He could see his breath in the air. He sat up, confused, and immediately spotted the open window. The curtains were fluttering. Rain had soaked the sill and dripped onto the carpet below. Robert swung his legs out of bed and crossed the room quickly, his heart beginning to race. He grabbed the window frame and pulled it shut, clicking the latch firmly into place. Then he stood there, staring at the muddy streaks on the white paint. 3 distinct marks, roughly parallel, as if someone had gripped the frame from outside and pushed upward. Robert's first thought was burglary. His second was assault. Someone had tried to get in while he slept. The idea made his skin crawl. He checked the rest of the house. Nothing disturbed, nothing missing. Then he grabbed the phone and called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. They were polite, thorough, and ultimately unconvinced. They examined the window, walked the perimeter of the house, checked the yard for footprints. The ground was soft from rain, but they found nothing. No shoe prints, no ladder marks, no disturbance in the flower beds beneath the window. Probably the storm, one officer said. Old latch could have given way. I checked it before bed, Robert insisted. It was locked. The officer nodded sympathetically. Wind does strange things. Pressure builds up, forces things open. We see it sometimes. But Robert knew that didn't explain the mud. He pointed it out again. The officer examined it more closely, then shrugged. Could have been there before. Could have splashed up from the rain. They filed a report and left. Robert spent the rest of the day cleaning the window and rechecking every lock in the house. He told himself the police were probably right. Old house, old latch, strange weather. But the feeling wouldn't leave him. The certainty that someone had been outside his window in the dark, reaching in. He didn't know yet that he wasn't alone in that feeling. That same morning across town, a woman named Patricia Holcomb was standing in her bedroom, staring at her own open window. And like Robert, she lived alone. Patricia Holcomb was 67 years old and had lived in Traverse City her entire life. She was a retired schoolteacher, widowed for 9 years, and still sharp as a tack. She didn't scare easily, but the open window frightened her. She'd woken at dawn to find it open exactly 3 inches, just like Robert's. Her bedroom was on the first floor, facing the backyard. She'd gone to sleep with the window locked, she was certain of it. The latch was new, installed just last summer after she'd had the whole house resealed for winter. It required deliberate effort to unlock and lift. And yet, there it was, open, with cold November air pouring in and rain-soaked curtains clinging to the sill. Patricia didn't call the police. She was stubborn, independent, and didn't want to be seen as a frightened old woman. Instead, she called her son, David, who lived 30 minutes away in Sutton's Bay. He arrived by mid-morning, irritated and worried in equal measure. Mom, you should have called 911. For what? An open window? David examined the latch. It was intact, undamaged. He checked the yard. No footprints, no evidence anyone had been near the house. But unlike Robert's police officers, David didn't dismiss it. He saw the way his mother's hands trembled slightly as she stood by the window. He saw the fear she was trying to hide. I'm staying the night, he said. Don't be ridiculous. I'm staying. That evening, David walked the property with a flashlight, checking for anything unusual. The house was surrounded by trees on 3 sides, with dense woods beginning about 50 feet from the back wall. He found nothing suspicious. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign of trespassers. But as he stood at the edge of the tree line, shining his light into the darkness, he felt watched. It was irrational, instinctive, but unmistakable. He went back inside and locked every door and window himself. Then he sat up in the living room until nearly 2 a.m, listening. The house was silent except for the ticking of his mother's grandfather clock and the occasional groan of old wood settling. Eventually, exhaustion won. He dozed off on the couch. He woke at dawn to his mother's scream. David bolted upright and ran to her bedroom. Patricia was standing by the window, her face pale. The window was open again, 3 inches, exactly the same as before. And this time, there was something new on the sill. A single wet leaf, brown and curled, placed deliberately in the center of the frame. I heard it open, Patricia whispered. Around 4. I heard the sound of the latch clicking. David felt cold spread through his chest. He'd been awake until 2. The window had been locked. He'd checked it himself, and now it was open. He called the police. This time, the officers took it more seriously. 2 break-ins, or attempted break-ins, in the same neighborhood within 24 hours was unusual. They took photos, dusted for prints, found nothing. But one of the officers, a younger man named Keith Novak, asked a question that changed everything. Anyone else on this street live alone? Patricia thought for a moment. Robert Fenton, 2 houses down. And the Hendersons used to, but they moved. And there's Melanie Cross, across the street. Officer Novak wrote down the names. Then he and his partner walked the neighborhood, knocking on doors. By noon, they'd found 3 more people who reported the exact same thing. Windows open during the storm, muddy streaks, no signs of forced entry. All of them lived alone. All of them had woken to the sound of rain and cold air, and one of them, Melanie Cross, a 34-year-old nurse who worked night shifts at Munson Medical Center, had found muddy footprints on her bedroom floor. Small prints, barefoot, leading from the window to the side of her bed, then back to the window again. Someone had been inside her room while she slept. The Traverse City Police Department wasn't equipped for this kind of case. They were used to drunk drivers, domestic disputes, and the occasional burglary. A string of coordinated break-ins targeting people who lived alone was beyond their usual scope. But they did what they could: increase patrols, send out a community alert, and advised residents to keep doors and windows locked. Officer Novak, however, wasn't satisfied. He'd grown up in Traverse City and knew the town's history. He knew that strange things occasionally happened in the dense woods surrounding the area: missing hikers, unexplained animal behavior, old stories passed down from the Ojibwe tribes who'd lived there for centuries. He didn't believe in folklore, but he believed in patterns. He started digging. Over the next week, he interviewed all 5 victims: Robert Fenton, Patricia Holcomb, Melanie Cross, and 2 others, a man named Thomas Breyer and a woman named Ellen Marsh. All of them lived within a 3-mile radius. All of them lived alone. All of them had experienced the same thing during the November the 13th storm. But there was another pattern Novak noticed: geography. When he plotted the addresses on a map, they formed a rough arc along the eastern edge of town, where residential neighborhoods backed up against state forest land. The houses were all within sight of the tree line. He started researching the area's history. He found logging records from the early 1900s, land disputes from the 1950s, and environmental reports from the 1980s. Nothing unusual. But then he found something else: a newspaper article from 1957. Local woman reports intruder. Police find no evidence. The article was brief. A woman named Dorothy Fletcher, living alone on the outskirts of town, had reported waking to find her bedroom window open and muddy handprints on the sill. Police investigated, but found no evidence of a break-in. The case was dismissed as a possible animal or wind damage. Dorothy Fletcher moved away 2 months later. Novak kept digging. He found another article from 1973, nearly identical, and another from 1989. Each time, a person living alone near the woods, an open window during a storm, muddy prints, no evidence. Each time, the case went unsolved, and each time the incident stopped after one person in the cluster went missing. Novak felt his stomach tighten. He cross-referenced the names with missing persons reports. In 1957, a man named Lawrence Hodge had disappeared 3 weeks after the window incident stopped. In 1973, a woman named Carol Sims. In 1989, a man named Peter Larch. All 3 had lived alone. All 3 had reported open windows. All 3 had vanished without a trace. He brought his findings to his sergeant, who listened with growing unease. The sergeant authorized increased surveillance and instructed Novak to warn all 5 current victims personally. Novak visited each house, explaining what he'd found, and urging them to stay somewhere else until the situation was resolved. 4 of them agreed. Robert Fenton went to stay with his brother. Patricia Holcomb moved in temporarily with her son. Thomas Breyer checked into a motel. Ellen Marsh stayed with a friend. But Melanie Cross refused. She was scheduled for a double shift at the hospital and didn't have time to pack or relocate. She promised to keep her doors and windows locked and to call if anything happened. On the night of November 27th, 2 weeks after the initial incidents, Melanie Cross didn't show up for work. Her supervisor called her phone. No answer. Called her emergency contact. No answer. By morning, a welfare check was requested. When police entered her home, they found the front door locked from the inside. The bedroom window was open. exactly 3 inches, and Melanie Cross was gone. The disappearance of Melanie Cross turned a local oddity into a genuine crisis. The Michigan State Police were called in. The FBI was notified. Search teams combed the woods for days using dogs, helicopters, and thermal imaging. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no signs of struggle. It was as if Melanie had simply evaporated. The media descended on Traverse City. National news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a mystery. The open window disappearances. Theories proliferated. Serial killer, cult activity, trafficking ring. The town, normally quiet and peaceful, became paranoid. Hardware stores sold out of window locks. People who'd lived alone for years suddenly sought roommates. Officer Novak continued his investigation, now assisted by state detectives. They re-examined every detail of Melanie's disappearance. Her house showed no signs of forced entry. Her car was in the driveway, her purse, phone, and keys were on the kitchen counter. The only anomaly was the open window and a single detail that hadn't been noted before. Her bed was neatly made, as if she'd never slept in it that night. One detective, a veteran named Angela Pierce, focused on the historical pattern Novak had uncovered. She obtained old case files and began constructing a timeline. The incidents occurred roughly every 15 to 16 years, 1957, 1973, 1989, and now 1999. Each time, multiple people reported open windows during a major storm in mid-November. Each time, one person disappeared shortly after. It's cyclical, Pierce said during a briefing, which means it's either a pattern of opportunity or something deliberate. Serial offenders don't wait 16 years between crimes, another detective countered. No, Pierce agreed, but cults do. Rituals do. The theory was thin, but it was the only one that fit the pattern. Pierce started researching local groups, religious organizations, and historical folklore. She interviewed longtime residents, including elderly locals who remembered the 1957 and 1973 incidents. Most dismissed them as coincidence or weather-related accidents. But one man, a retired forest ranger named Dale Kimura, told her something different. The Ojibwe have stories, Dale said. Old ones, about something that lives in the deep woods. They called it the listener, said it came during storms to find people who were alone. It didn't break in, it waited for permission. An open window, an unlocked door, any gap was enough. Pierce listened politely, taking notes but not committing to belief. Folklore wasn't evidence. But Dale continued. They said it took one person every generation, just one. And then it would go back into the forest and sleep until the next storm, the next cycle. Why one person? Pierce asked. Dale shrugged. Balance, maybe. Payment. The stories aren't clear, but they all say the same thing. It only comes when someone is truly alone. Pierce filed the information but didn't share it with the team. She knew how it would sound, but privately, she couldn't shake the detail about permission, the idea that the windows had been opened from the inside, not forced from the outside. She requested Melanie Cross's medical records and found something unexpected. Melanie had been prescribed sleep medication, Ambien, 2 months earlier. The prescription was active. Pierce cross-referenced the other victims. Thomas Breyer took Lunesta. Ellen Marsh used over-the-counter sleep aids. Robert Fenton had recently started using melatonin after his divorce. Sleeping medications. People living alone. Deep, uninterrupted sleep. Pierce felt a chill. If someone, or something, was targeting people who wouldn't wake easily, who were isolated and vulnerable, the pattern made terrible sense. But it didn't explain how the windows were opened from the inside, or why there were never signs of struggle, unless the victims had opened the windows themselves. The theory was disturbing. What if they'd been sleepwalking? What if something had drawn them outside? Pierce ordered toxicology tests on samples from Melanie's home. They found nothing unusual, no drugs, no chemicals, no evidence of coercion. But they did find something else. On the windowsill, barely visible under ultraviolet light, were organic residues, plant material and soil that didn't match anything in Melanie's yard. The lab identified traces of white pine, hemlock, and a rare type of moss found only in old-growth forests. The kind of forest that existed 30 miles north of Traverse City, where logging had stopped in the 1920s and the trees had grown wild and untouched for nearly a century. Pierce organized a search party. The forest north of Traverse City was vast, over 40,000 acres of protected state land, dense with pine, birch, and maple. It was beautiful and isolating, the kind of place where you could walk for hours without seeing another person. Pierce led a team of 12 into the woods on December 3rd, following the areas flagged by environmental reports as old-growth regions. They walked for 3 hours before finding the first sign, a torn piece of fabric snagged on a low branch. The lab later confirmed it was from Melanie Cross's pajamas. They pressed deeper. The forest grew darker, the canopy thicker. The ground was soft with moss and decades of fallen needles. And then they found the clearing. It was small, maybe 30 feet across, surrounded by ancient white pines. In the center was a depression in the earth, circular, about 6 feet in diameter, as if something had been resting there for a long time. Around the depression were items: a shoe from 1989, a scarf from 1973, a rusted watch from 1957. Personal effects from the missing people arranged carefully, almost reverently, but no bodies, no bones, no graves. Pierce radioed for forensics and secured the scene. The team photographed everything, bagged the evidence, and searched the surrounding area. They found no other structures, no signs of habitation, nothing to suggest human activity beyond the items in the clearing. And then, as the sun began to set, one of the officers found something else. Marks on the trees. Not carvings, scratches. Long, deep gouges in the bark, running vertically down the trunks of several pines surrounding the clearing. They were old, weathered, but unmistakable. Something had been climbing these trees, something with claws or nails that had gripped the bark hard enough to tear it. Pierce stood in the clearing as darkness fell, feeling the weight of the forest around her. The listener. Dale Kimura's words echoed in her mind. She didn't believe in folklore, but she believed in evidence. And the evidence suggested something had been taking people from this area for at least 70 years. The team left the forest that night, planning to return with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. But they never found Melanie Cross. The searches continued for weeks, then months, then quietly stopped. The case went cold. The official conclusion was abduction by an unknown party. The media moved on. The town slowly returned to normal, but the people who'd experienced the open windows never forgot. Robert Fenton moved to another state. Patricia Holcomb installed motion sensors and cameras around her entire house. Thomas Breyer and Ellen Marsh eventually moved away too, and Officer Keith Novak kept the case file on his desk for years afterward, always wondering. In 2015, 16 years after Melanie Cross disappeared, the pattern repeated. A major storm hit Traverse City in mid-November. 5 people living alone near the forest reported waking to open windows, muddy streaks, and the feeling of being watched. The police, now aware of the historical cycle, responded immediately. All 5 people were relocated. The forest was searched preemptively. Nothing was found. And this time, no one disappeared. The cycle had been broken, not by catching the perpetrator, but by removing the opportunity. The people who might have been taken were protected, surrounded by others, no longer alone in the critical moment. But the question remains, what was in those woods? Was it human, a person or a group enacting some ritual every 16 years? Or was it something else? Something the Ojibwe had known about for centuries and tried to warn against? Officer Novak, now retired, still believes the latter. He spent years studying the case, the folklore, the patterns. He believes the listener is real, not in the supernatural sense, but as a natural phenomenon we don't yet understand. Something that exists in the deep forest, emerging periodically, drawn to isolation and vulnerability. People think of predators as constant threats, he told me in an interview last year. But nature doesn't work that way. Some creatures only hunt when conditions are perfect, when the prey is alone, unaware, and the environment provides cover. Maybe this is just that. A predator patient enough to wait years for the perfect moment. The items found in the clearing were eventually returned to the families of the missing. They provided closure of a sort, though no bodies were ever recovered. The clearing itself was monitored for years, but showed no further activity. In 2031, the cycle will come around again. Traverse City authorities are already preparing increased patrols, community awareness programs, outreach to people living alone near the forest. They're taking the pattern seriously now, even if they don't fully understand it. Robert Fenton still thinks about that November night in 1999. He's remarried now, living in Arizona, far from any forests. But sometimes, when storms roll in, he checks the windows before bed. Not once, but twice. And he never, ever sleeps alone. Because he knows that whatever was outside his window that night was patient. And patient things always return. The question is, will we be ready when it does? If this story unsettled you, you're not alone. The truth is, we still don't know what happens in those woods every 16 years. Drop a comment with your theory, and make sure you're not sleeping alone tonight.